It's Sunday, and that means we're back with another Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Before we jump into the show with Dennis Wiscount, it's an amazing show. You're going to love it. I got to remind you, the Dank Podstash is now officially sponsored by Anarchy Lifting. It's time to get hashtag Boogaloo ready and in fighting shape. Greg Papanikolas is going to get you there with personalized meal plans, training, group support, and tons of amazing fitness and motivational resources and knowledge, including the Project Sparta Facebook group. You can go to anarchyliftingcoach.com and learn more about Greg's work in Anarchy Lifting. And when you're ready to get signed up and get fit, go to gregpapanikolas.clickfunnels.com/opt-in and get started on your path to health. I'm in Project Sparta right now. I'm down a few pounds already, feeling great, and loving the personalized menu and workouts. Greg works with you. It's great. Don't be that guy that only sits and talks about change, whether it's into your health or even the Boogaloo. Get up, start learning, drilling, and training. One of the most important parts of prepping, training, all that, no matter what, is your physical health. Get to anarchyliftingcoach.com now and get after it. If you didn't catch me saying those web addresses, they will be in the description for this podcast. We also have a special offer for our listeners from friend of the show, author and content creator Shane Radliff of Liberty Under Attack Publications. Take 10% off your order at libertyunderattack.com by using the coupon code DANK10. That's DANK10. They've got books focusing on self-liberation, freedom strategy, solutions, and more. Current books include Hashtag Agora, Second Realm Book on Strategy, Ben Stone's Sedition, Subversion, and Sabotage, and Shane's very own Vanu, A Strategy for Self-Liberation, along with some great works of fiction. I believe Hashtag Agora is a work of fiction. Also, Brushfire by Matt Witecki. Gotta check that out. It's so good. We've had him on the show. Check out that episode too. Liberty Under Attack also offers assistance to new authors throughout the publishing process, including editing, proofreading, formatting for Kindle and paperback, and full-service audiobook productions. That's Liberty Under Attack Publications. Share your story, find your freedom. One more shout out to Bad Moon Hemp. Check out badmoonhemp.wordpress.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your handmade hemp needs. I use their beard oil, beard balm, and it is wonderful. Don't sleep on that. They have other products besides just stuff for awesome beards. Check it out, badmoonhemp.wordpress.com. And now enjoy episode 67 of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. This is a good one, like I said. You're going to love it.
Enemy of the State.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the State.
Dank Podstash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Check out thedankpodstash.com to find every episode of the Dank Podstash, links to support the show via our BitBacker and Patreon, Dank Podstash merchandise, and much more. If you'd like to advertise on the Dank Podstash, email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com. We've made it to episode 67 of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash, in which I'm going to be schooled on some psychology of the state and boomers by Dennis Wiscount. Looking forward to it. We've talked a little bit before this. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us about you a bit before we jump on in.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dennis Wiscount. I attended Penn State University from like 2005 to 2010. I got an undergrad in psychology. I didn't do any internship that time around. I instead decided to ply my craft with industrial organizational psychology and things like implicit prejudice and subtle discrimination. That sounds big and really ominous, but all it means is, like, if I can relate it more to you, like, if you would talk to someone and you had like "fuck the police" on your hat, right? And you know, they're just kind of looking at you, maybe like they're not facing you as comfortably as I am now. They'd be like,
yeah,
you know,
short
conversation. They don't want to talk to you, and that's the kind of stuff we looked at. But beyond that, I wanted to go into clinical background and I did the grad school bid and all that fun stuff. I got out. I worked with, some people up in Maine, and ultimately I kind of walked away from it for a couple different reasons, but my main reasoning behind it was I wanted to ensure that the family I was starting would have a parent at home to sort of pass on things me and my wife both value. On top of that, both me and my wife compared paychecks, and it was kind of like she's a pediatrician and I was, a lower rung level guy, so it wasn't hard to figure out who was gonna keep going.
Living the dream, man. Hell yeah.
Oh yeah, 3 kids.
Yeah, awesome. That's a good number, I think. Let me real quick ask them before we jump into the stuff that we decided previously to talk about on the show. So you're saying there's a natural aversion to more abrasive, kind of out there imagery, like the "fuck the police" hat, that kind of thing, and you studied not necessarily, in relation to anarchy and stuff, but you studied things like that. So maybe that kind of messaging. How does that? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing if we're relating it to bring the word of anarchy out to other people?
I think ultimately what it just kind of says is it's not extrapolated as much as that. You kind of, and I mean everybody listening, when you interpret that kind of data, you kind of have to look at it as you with the hat on would be, looking at the other person who's looking at you like that and thinking, man, I'm the outlier, I'm the out group here. Whereas like those social norms, mores, and all those kind of things aren't integral to the person that's displaying those sort of bodily behaviors. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's not on your priority list to fit that social mold, I guess, if you're trying to bring that to other people.
Right.
But they might not receive it as well.
Correct. Yes.
So, okay. So what is there an optimal way to interact with people then that you found?
I think ultimately, and it's not so much psychology because it does get lumped in with a lot of other disciplines, but they call them teachable moments. Short windows where something may happen, and depending on the person you're trying to reach, you may have planted a seed, not necessarily, walked right up to the glass window with a brick of logic and anarchy and just went, hey buddy, welcome to the fold.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more you're planting a seed, if that makes sense, and hoping it grows.
Absolutely. That's my message behind memes. When people ask if memes are effective or not, I think it's not only planting a seed, but just spiking that fucker right into their brain, because they see that and usually they get mad or they get and have a response or something like that, or who knows what, but then they're going to be stuck thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like nobody, when they have an emotional reaction over a meme or a controversial statement, just, well, maybe some people, I shouldn't say nobody, because there's a lot of, like I've been posting about lately, there's a lot of apathy where people just say, I don't care, America first, and go on with their day. But most people, if you've gotten a reaction from it, they're going to keep thinking about that for a while, even if it's not right away at that point in time.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. It's, I don't know.
Absolutely.
I think it's effective. Yeah, fuck. I always lose I get on a monologue and I forget my next question that I was going to ask you, because I'm fascinated by psychology quite a bit, but, didn't go, I went to college for it for like a year and never finished. So it wasn't, I didn't go in deep. I think a lot of people have done that, but, yeah, damn it. I can't remember, but tell us about, what we were talking about with boomers. We were saying a push button, mentality.
Okay. So how do I put this? I don't have any major college or university that gives me funding to study this. So this is sort of an untested hypothesis. You kind of, in a broader philosophical sense, if you look at the reality and the planet which we're thrown in, water flows downhill, if I can condense that pretty good. Deer isn't going to charge up over a steep hill. He's going to walk around it.
Mhm.
We generally, everything at every level of life follows the path of least resistance. And sometimes doing what's right is less preferable than doing what's easy, in case leading up to this point of like push
Mhm.
button. In the 1950s, Strauss and Howe, that book I told you about, The Fourth Turning, when they talked about generationals and stuff,
Mhm.
people who were trying to forecast how the world would go during the age of the 50s, which was like, I think it was 46 to 61 was the boomer generation. But they predicted that, it would be Disney's Tomorrowland. For example, the things I told you about in private, that you had all these, whether it was Warner Brothers or Disney, joking about somebody having a push button house where they push it and the toast shoots out and the bacon gets smacked with a hammer and stays clean, and everybody just sort of runs along a conveyor belt. And they kind of looked at this and said, this is what's coming. And as the generation ages, it didn't turn out that way, because boomers kind of gave rise to the younger ones. I mean, like born in the 40s, had kids, and 65 on out, they were the Gen Xers until I think 1981. And they kind of went from like wholesome, artistry, and sort of a renaissance, a warm like summer generation, to more of a creeping fall. They looked at things such as like, you had the advent of MTV, you had punk rock come out, you had all kinds of stuff that came out that was sort of anti against the establishment. I don't know if you remember, I have vague memories of it because I was born in '83, but there was a show called Family Ties in the '80s.
Oh yeah.
And it was generational like rift. So Michael J. Fox is in it, and him and his sister played Gen X Republicans.
Yeah.
And their parents were they were hippies in the '60s when they were their age, so they had this ideological clash. And to work that back to the forecasters, and to work that back to the push button, they sort of thought this land of tomorrow was coming, but they didn't take into account that we're all kind of thrown into whatever time we're born into in life, if that makes sense. And the contributing like societal norms, the people we grow up with, our families, they contribute to all things that sort of shape us both as people and as a generation. And on top of that, instead of having like people from the Gen X generation just sort of shaping the generation in terms of art and culture, you still had people like Steven Spielberg and other people making movies, because you jumped from that radio television to like big blockbuster movies and all that other kind of stuff. And it's how can I put this? The baby boomer generation overall, in terms of like infancy and rearing children, they were very indulged by the silent generation that went through World War II, or quote unquote the greatest generation. And they were indulged. They were given overwhelming positive regard, to the point where some of them don't remember clearly, or as perhaps caustically as more modern children might remember, their parents or their dad being deployed all the time. You shifted like all kinds of things from like the John Wayne era of Westerns versus say like Clint Eastwood. In John Wayne, everybody laughed and joked, but they're serious, whereas Clint Eastwood took this acerbic and caustic attitude towards life. The Man with No Name trilogy, High Plains Drifter, all those kinds of things.
Sure.
But so you sort of have this ebb and flow of time, and new generations coming along to replace things, and their attitudes reacting to how their parents are. And to partially answer that in a roundabout way, I don't think you're ever going to change that. So I think the desire to do what's easy versus what's hard or right or righteous, I think probably pervades through generation to generation. I think, however, getting back to my hypothesis that, they were promised so much of a push button age, and you had B.F. Skinner, the guy I told you about that did the rats with push the propeller, or push the bar, receive the pellet, and you kind of can extrapolate that data to how can I apply that to people? Because you can't, how do I put it? If there's somebody like me with a background in psychology who's looking at the government as a detrimental thing that should not be harming people and forcing them into violent coercion, and I'm looking at all those things that are readily available and easy to access at any time, you can't tell me somebody's using the same tool set for something much darker.
Right.
You'll notice, for example, if we're going to go with the push the button, get a pellet, I'm having a hard time thinking of it, and I tried looking it up myself before we started this a couple nights ago. When you have people in media screaming at you, and it'll happen like, let's see, in January, 10 months from now, you'll have people screaming on your TV, in your ads on Facebook, social media, everywhere. They'll tell you, this is the most important election of our time. Get out there and vote. You know?
Every time.
Yes, every time. And they want you to go in, push the button and receive the pellet. And sometimes, I don't know how voting halls are out where you guys are, but in Pennsylvania and like when I lived in Maine, there's always really nice elderly people who hand you like a ton of food before you walk out and your stickers. So I mean, there's an immediate reward for you know, all that kind of stuff that reinforces that. And this goes back kind of to doing what's right versus what's easy. It's easy to do that. It's easy to go into a computer, or if it's a write-in or a ballot or whatever, and just go, you know, straight Republican, straight Democrat, straight Libertarian, whatever, or put your vote in. And then you're rewarded with food or a shiny sticker that everybody else gets, and you think, I've done my civic duty, because they prime you with that.
Right.
They go, I've done my civic duty. That sticks me out like that, you know. And to a sense that they've kind of taken that push button age and they've applied it to sort of societal form and function, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because where I'm at, I went to do a video about not voting. I went to try to find a polling place and make a live video in front of it and talk to people. We don't have any where I'm at. It's all online, or they mail it to you. You got to register online and they mail you your stuff. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't even, first of all, I can't troll people outside a polling place, which sucks. But second of all, that seems, it seems like it's really taking away from that idea of the, you know, push the button, get the shiny sticker, because people, they're just mailing it in. There's no sense of completion for their political masturbation at that point.
Nope.
And that's strange.
Nope.
And maybe they're encouraging less voting. I would say that could be a thing up here in Washington, because they're trying to pass a state income tax. I've been on the voting thing a lot this morning, and I always am, hence NonVotingNick. But it's strange, because for 85 years up here, they've voted down a state income tax, and well, I should say the voters have, and they're voting it down. Okay. People have, or the state has hidden the money, or found a way to hide ways to get the money that they're losing out on in a state income tax in everything else in daily life. One example being what they call a discovery pass up here. You got to pay just to park on the side of the road and go fish in a lake on top of your regular license and all that stuff. And it makes sense that it's a push button idea for people to be trained like rats to go do something that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's sort of, it all kind of feeds into that. It's the same notion as, you gotta forgive me, I can't remember all them white ladies' names that were like meme famous a couple years ago when they called the cops on people.
Oh shit.
But that's the same process. I'm gonna call the police, or I'm gonna, you know, do that. If you want to talk about a more not so much personal, but we all sort of face it in social media, you know, when people want to hamper someone's rights, and usually in the last decade, I want to say it's gun rights or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or you might even have a gun owner who could seriously have a decent collection, and they see, like, you know, a dude comes in and blows away a bunch of kids in a church or something. That didn't actually happen. I'm just kind of, you know, making that up as I go along. But they'll look at their friends and go, man, maybe we should get rid of them. Because, you know, they're seeing the overwhelming, like, negative after, you know, consequences of this action. And, you know, it may not, and again, this might be a teachable moment for someone. So I'm trying to weave as much as I can into the questions you asked me.
Sure.
But you could look at the person, and if you're a good friend, you could look at them and go, no, that's not really fixing the problem. I mean, I can understand you're really upset. You don't want to see that happen, but you can't throw your rights away by pushing that button to sort of make it better for temporary, you know, state of execution, so to speak. The kind of notion that, you know, it's easier to do such a thing in order for easier gratification. It's all kind of interrelated, if that makes sense.
Sure.
As far as what I was talking about as life on our planet or plane of existence, whatever you want to call it, we all sort of follow a path of, you know, least resistance, and you know, we usually want to push that button as opposed to getting up and, you know, solving your own problems. If that makes sense.
Well, and
or working to find a common ground.
I want to loop that back to boomers, and not just boomers, but any any intergenerational, like any different generation, and how I think you said they're kind of stuck in it, or were dropped in it and then get stuck in it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I don't really like a whole lot of the new popular music that's coming out. I find it hard to call it music, and I sit here and think, am I becoming a fucking boomer? Am I just getting old? I'm shaking my fist at clouds, you know? It is it good music, and I'm not seeing that because of where I was dropped and my refusal to adapt, because that's something I think that would inhibit boomers from actually having that kind of push button life. Look at them with technology. They can't get on board with it, and yet they want that technology to exist. So I don't know if I'm getting stuck in it, if everyone gets stuck in where they are generationally, or what.
I mean, it's possible, but the funny thing about stuff like, is it okay if I just call it blame for now, where you're looking for an outlet for that sort of problem? Okay, so in any situation, whether it's positive or negative, unfortunately, people have a tendency to have the cognition that blame can only be like lumped into one plate. Unfortunately, it's like a big jar of mayonnaise. You can spread it everywhere. You know, all things have a contributing factor. As far as like music goes, you had Frank Zappa. He talked about, you know, his generation going through in the 50s and 60s, rock and roll came about. You had all these different ideas. You know, you had reggae and all these different musics, and a lot of the old cigar chopping rich dudes were just like, I don't know what works, and they threw out the wall to see what sticked. And you had this unrelenting, you know, birth of different types of music mixtures and ideas. And when the Gen Xers were kind of growing up, you had younger executives that came around in the 70s and 80s and said, no, I know what's cool. You know, they wear the glasses, they got the Miami Vice suits, and they told people it was popular, and they engineered it that way. I sort of noticed with the advent of the internet, when MTV was kind of going more to like a bubblegum pop, they got rid of Matt Pinfield and Headbangers Ball and all that cool stuff I used to watch. And, you know, even country was kind of going that way too. You know, can't think of a comedian, but he talks about, you know, placating people with country, even though you're wearing like a $3,000 getup.
Yes.
So I think music has taken a shift where it's highly over processed. You look at stuff that's kind of a hit and go, oh my God, like may his soul rest in peace. But Neil Peart died, and you know, he was the drummer, and almost sheer poetry of his lyrics and his music, whether you like him or not. You know, I don't like everything that Rush has done, but good Lord, he had some good stuff. And then you look at, like, I'd really have to think maybe Beyonce song or something. There's like 15 writers, and you're just kind of like,
right. Yeah.
You know, it's a weird
15 writers for
sort
saying
of
the same thing
contrived
for 10
platitude.
lines. It's ridiculous. Like, I
Yes,
love
yes.
people put Taylor Swift lyrics next to Rush or just like all kinds of stuff, and it's like, Jesus Christ. Or that was the latest one I saw. Taylor Swift's one of her million breakup songs next to I think Lateralis by Tool, and it's like, now that's a breakup song. And it's just the same shit. It's just terrible lyrically compared to it.
Right.
Yeah, I
Sure.
don't know. But my biggest one, I think, these days is
Sorry.
Billie Eilish. I don't think that's music. That's someone mumbling to a semi-catchy beat.
No.
And I'm probably going to catch a lot of hate for this. But apparently mumbling is what's
That's okay.
where it's at. So mumble rap and whatnot.
Good Lord. I get accused of that quite often from my wife. Maybe I should start a career in music.
And if anyone thinks that what I just said was incredibly boomer, feel free to drop an OK boomer in the comments. Well, you can message me that too. That's fine. Bring it on. I'll take the boomer label for not liking Billie Eilish, I guess. But I'm glad
That's all right.
we could bring.
Listen, you're talking to a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna tell you. Listen, you're talking to a guy that has Sirius XM in his truck, and I listen to like 60s on 6 and like sometimes 70s on 7 when I need to like hear something that's not modern. If that
Sure.
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Like, if I don't have my MP3s with.
Yeah, I tend to stick with metal for the most part. It jumps around. I get sick of one thing, I'll just kind of, just totally dive into one genre, and then once I'm sick of it, go to something else. Folk metal to actual country western, like old rebel country, that kind of stuff, to 90s all kinds of shit.
Oh, yeah.
But top 40s is not something that I do. But I'm glad that we brought the idea of voting into this, because that's today's big thing on Facebook, and the thing I always engage in, and something I've written articles on for the Counter Economist. It seems to me to be completely useless, and I'm wondering how it seems to you, both from a psychological perspective and in practice, in what we see.
Oh, okay. People, and in a large umbrella term, they tend to forget that politicians come from the same vacuum we're all stuck in together.
Mm-hmm.
They allow the game to kind of be rigged in that you only have two parties in this country. Sometimes the Libertarian Party or the Green Party makes it somewhere, but usually it's a low-hanging position. And regardless of what party they're in, they're just kind of stuck voting for these people, and they think, oh man, he's going to do all this stuff. Like Trump's was build the wall and all that other stuff in 2016. And before 8 years ago when Obama ran, they both had the same sort of gimmick going, in that President Obama had the hope and change, and Trump is running on the same thing both times, make America great again. They're fiendishly clever ways of getting people to inject their own ideas into stuff.
Right.
Whereas, you hear hope and change, maybe the generations of that time were able to vote. They had their own ideas of what hope and change means. And certainly the left certainly gives Trump and his voters this credence that, make America great again. It's all racist or whatever. And certainly there may be people sitting somewhere in this country that are like, yeah, we're going to get rid of all those undesirables. I don't want them here. That's what makes America great. It creates differing ideologies based on a couple of vagaries, and that appeals to somebody that just wants to push a button and not deal with it, if that makes sense, because you can be lied to, you can be courted, and it sort of happens over and over again. And what you're seeing is sort of an immediate reinforcer on top of with the voting and stuff, pushing the button, making it go away or making it happen. and beyond that, your mind just kind of melts away. I mean, I'm talking from my personal experience,
Sure.
deep self-examination of, why were you like that? Like that meme. And you tend not to really think about the consequences of your actions and what this may, pan out to. And again, I think that's not so much specific to the boomer generation and their utopian promise of a land of tomorrow. I think that's pretty much how the behavior modification ideology is shaped, from kindergarten on up, if that makes sense.
Sure.
You hit high school and you're told you turn 18, register to vote, register for the draft, do all this stuff, and do your patriotic duty. If you had a clean, unbiased talk about what your patriotic duty might actually entail, I think far less people would be enthused about it than just hearing that all you have to do is pull the lever, push the button, punch the Chad or whatever's based on state by state basis.
Right.
I think that immediate rewards and easy rewards are often, like I said, it's more appealing to people. Does that answer your question? Or
yeah, absolutely. And so you think this is behavioral modification, obviously used by the state. We know it's used by the state.
Sure.
But it's multi-generational, and it's continuing on because it's been successful.
Yes, I just think you see it rearing its ugly head in different ways now. I mentioned to you that the boomer generation, they were overly indulged by their mothers and possibly fathers when they finally came home. You had people who were doted on because the silent generation, they sort of had they're called the silent generation because, at that point in time, parents are a little more removed. They're a little bit colder. They sort of looked at it as children should be seen and not heard. Same as women. And I'm not saying that's right. So you sort of had this generational rebellion. Well, it's like, F you, buddy. I'm going to spend all my time with my kids. I'm going to give them the best I can. I'm going to indulge them and stuff. And I sort of wonder if that comes from where like the Karen memes come from, where you have people in the millennial groups and the Zoomers and stuff just sort of like looking at a customer care person at the store and being like, okay, you don't have it, I'll figure it out later. Whereas like you have an older generation come along, they're pounding their fist going, I want a manager, this should be made right.
Yeah.
Even if it's they spent $60 at a Motel 6 and they can't believe how dingy the room was. If that makes sense,
Yeah, imagine that.
So it's generational, differences, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just sort of think that the notion of planting that seed in the 50s and 60s, like Tomorrowland, all these big promises, sometimes they bear differing fruits. And I think it was easier at that point to realize that, you had people who did, research like B.F. Skinner and Pavlov and all those people, and structured a very specific branch of psychology called, behavior modification, and learning about like reinforcers and all that stuff. And from there, I assume they had taken it and used it full time. From a psychological perspective, I know a lot of people, my own buddy Andrew in Virginia, he's super worried about what's going down right now. And he sort of looks at this sort of dichotomy of tribalism that's been stoked for like however long it's just been the Democrat and Republican Party, and sort of the ignorance and the ease of being so like not caring. I don't care.
Yeah.
Fuck them. I don't care. Glass the whole country. That kind of stuff. That animosity is very much at home too, and this goes a bit outside of my expertise, but I'm just venturing a guess that or an agreement to whoever had said we're currently in a civil war, but it's very cold. Because there's this staunch, there's that poem, turning and turning in the widening gyre in the center cannot hold. So you have these two tribes and they're being stoked against one another, and I worry that will eventually bear ill fruit as well.
Sure.
I
How
just
could it
don't.
not?
I'm not psychic, but I'm not right. I just don't know how that's going to come about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
If does that kind of like put it all together for you?
No, yeah, absolutely. I was
Or
going
do
to
you need me
ask
to
about
Okay.
combating this kind of programming. I'm glad you brought up that tribal aspect too, because I was going to say, if you found your way towards an anarchist way of thinking, you're probably doing pretty well at combating that programming that's been instilled. But then
Yeah.
we think about tribalism and all the anarcho hyphens and how there's still infighting between different types of anarchists and stuff. And it's like, well, maybe we're not fighting that so well, you know? So, like, what can we do?
Sure.
Whether you're an anarchist and you need to fight the tribalism that's going on, because there's not a lot of us, so tribalism doesn't make a lot of sense to split up. And I mean, tribalism in that way doesn't make a lot of sense to split up and try to take on the state, or how to fight it, how to fight it in other people if you're attempting to get other people to start thinking outside of that.
Okay. Kind of bad news, because I've been looking at this for ages. I don't think we're ever truly going to get rid of tribalism in us as a species. It's a very ingrained thing. Quick aside, just on how important human interaction is for us as a species. Nazi Germany did a study where they had newborn babies that were just sort of fed and not interacted with at all. They weren't given love. They weren't given anything that would be considered extraneous by scientific standards. Most of those babies didn't thrive well or died. Mm-hmm. What does that mean to your question? It just sort of means that as a species, we thrive on familiar people, feelings, and concepts that are comfortable to us. So anarcho-capitalists will hang out sometimes with agorists, otherwise, vice versa. And they might look at ANCOMs and be like rubbing the bridge of their nose in certain aspects.
And vice
they
versa.
Won't sort of want to congregate together. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens with like football teams, hockey teams, baseball teams, everything. You got a whole bunch of people in one stadium cheering for one tribe of people, whacking a ball with a stick or running it, a bunch of yards down the field.
Sure.
It's all sort of part of who we are as a species, and I would probably say that we can challenge ourselves to keep learning. If you ever look at an older copy of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, there's a definition of being alive, life, and they call it the continual growth. And as a teenager, that always stuck with me, because the idea of death is the exact opposite, that you've stopped growing, you've stagnated. In terms of how to combat that, I would probably say don't be opposed to new information, and constantly keep yourself abreast of information and education. Those are two very simple things. You can look at how the cognitions of those things happen. But ultimately, I would probably say, in terms of dealing with like the D and R of tribes, I don't necessarily think you can completely eliminate that. You'll certainly have talking heads and internet anarchist hucksters who will tell you that they're pure individuals, they don't need people and all that other kind of stuff, and they're very self-driven, and they will rely on people voluntarily. But that works so long as there's a society propping up an infrastructure that allows for internet and ease of access to food.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The silent generation and their parents, they went through the war, the Great Depression, and the Depression was much more severe than the war, but the war still had heavy item rationing of food and iron and tin and all those kinds of things. And how they got through it was, a lot of people had to do subsistence farming. Everybody had, one hen per like person in their house. They all had like a victory garden, as they called it. They had a local supply chain, and that kept people alive, so to speak, because you
Yeah.
knew somebody in your tribe, if you want to call it that, on your street that said, well, I got a ton of eggs, but Larry over there, he can grow okra, tomorrow. You want
Right.
to trade? And you had this bartering system of relying on each other, and communities were closer. To tie that back into what I said earlier about the information and internet age, you and I are talking like at opposite ends of the country.
Yeah.
We're closer more than we are ever, but I, I lament a bit that we don't really know our neighbors and our community near us. I think as near as well as I think we used to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think people our age could, and younger could be like, oh, I got this group on the Ghostbusters, and I can talk to people like all over the globe, and you feel this really tight knit community. But you can walk out on your front porch and be like, I know that guy, he's my neighbor, but that's it. You don't have a plethora of differing ideas, because usually you tend to seek out on the internet things that you closely associate with, like to match up
Yeah.
your tribe, if you want to call it that, or
Well,
your ideological network.
yeah, and it's certainly more appealing because you can't choose your neighbors, and a lot of times your neighbors are assholes. But you can choose your you can choose your group on the internet, no matter what social media you're on, and it's people that you match up with very well. Um, and it's funny because I was going to ask you
Oh yeah,
what you think about the idea of Dunbar's number of a tribe getting up to about 150, and that being the max for efficiency and for flowing smoothly as far as the tribe goes. Because I see that I love evolutionary psychology. I love listening to people give talks about that and stuff. And I think that's a valid point and a valid piece of information to consider when we're looking at the different tribes of anarchy, or why the world is kind of fucked how it is now because there's too many people under one tribe. And it's funny because I see it. Like I don't know, up close to 3,000 friends on Facebook. I don't know all of them. I couldn't remember half of them's names. There's a certain handful of people that I remember and I like to interact with, and that happens. So I think Dunbar's number is a valid theory.
Oh, absolutely. I think Dunbar's number absolutely would, fit into all of that, sir. I mean, it may not be exactly 150, but look at a town that has like 3,000 people, since we're talking thousands of numbers. You'll find a street maybe comprised of anywhere from like 90 to 150 people. They're all kind of their niche because they've congregated together. Back then, I'm not so much talking now because
Sure.
everybody's got amazing technology. But it seems to be a skill that I kind of worry, with times being what they are, that might have to be relearned, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of social interaction, starming, norming, and bringing your group together should you have to. The military uses it. Talk to any veteran when they talk about going to boot camp. They're hazed. They're formed a antagonistic relationship with their drill sergeant. They're thrown there with a bunch of dudes they've never met before, and they're forced to hunker down and work it out together. And almost always, they don't have as an antagonistic view of their drill sergeant once they figured out where they were going, if that makes sense.
Sure.
You've now made your small scale tribe. You have your squad, and you figured out what everybody else is good for. You relied on one another, and hopefully everything has come together without a hitch. I mean, in a utopian ideal, situation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, for like quick, light and fast,
Right.
results. It's a little bit more protracted in terms of, people on the street. Then if you want to talk more about, I know I mentioned like subsistence farming, and that has come up in a lot of liberty-minded pages I've seen over the last decade, where towns will tell you like you can't have a garden out front,
Sure.
you can't grow crops to subsist. That's legal. They fine you, and that I think is kind of a holdover from parts of the boomer generation and parts of the younger, quiet generation who kind of grew up in the early 20th century, and they had to deal with people having ducks or a single pig or a meat calf, and having a garden and deal with eggs and all that stuff. And they thought, when I'm my own man, that ain't gonna happen. And all of a sudden, you had this advent of mega grocers. You have, I don't know what's in Washington, but you have the wholesale clubs out here like BJ, Sam's Club, Walmart, super centers. You have everything super concentrated in one point, so you don't need to find a seamstress. You don't need to find somebody who can get you eggs, because there's somebody who does it wholesale. And they kind of did away with that because they figured, well, we got supermarkets now, you don't need to have chicken.
Sure.
And they write a law that of course bans it, and then usually there's somebody they don't like who has 30 chickens, like a quarter acre of land in a series of row homes that's always making problems. So that's the person they want to get back at. And kind of tying that all together with behaviors and how generations react and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
It's interesting because that's what I'm looking to do. That's what I'm trying to build, is that sort of small, tight-knit community through the people on Facebook that I know. Like, I'd love to get into a closer proximity with everybody and build that kind of community. And I think the state sees that, and that's another point to why they don't want that existing, why they're taxing like solar.
Right.
People are getting off the grid and going solar, and you're having to pay for the energy that you're not using, things like that.
Yep.
You think they see it as a threat then, for sure, the state?
I would say yes, but more so since we're sort of a quasi oligarchy / empire. I would say that the oligarchs that control power probably look at something like that and say, "You're not taking my customers from me. Tax the hell out of them."
Yeah.
Go, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," and drive away with their truckload of cash. So they come after people that set shining examples. In terms of how that goes, I can give you a little bit more of a psychological background on that, because I would say, and feel free to disagree with me, but I personally would say at any given time you're at war with the state.
Mm-hmm.
And probably from an agorist perspective more than perhaps an anarcho hyphen, your best bet to survive in that situation is to be resistant, but don't make yourself a desirable challenge. How can I put this? Like, don't be stupid and don't do things that would otherwise bring you into contact with the boot, gun, knife, whatever you want to call it, of the state. If they ban like growing tomatoes, like, it might cost you a little more. Fuck them. Get a bunch of UVB bulbs and put it in your basement and turn the UVB bulb on and put them in buckets in your house and grow them. You're doing it, but you're not like the idiot that's going to be like, well, screw them, I'm going to do it anyway, anarchy. And they do it in their backyard and they get clubbed up by the cops and it's fine.
Right.
You have to think kind of, you're defying set rules, but you're also, doing it in such a way that it's beneficial still for you, but you're not, looking at somebody who wants to make a career out of busting you up and going, I'm going to climb that mountain. You're just looking at, there's a couple of hills, no one cares.
Right. Well, it's tactics.
Camouflage, I guess, would be a good word.
Yeah, exactly. Camouflage, tactics.
Yes, tactics, sure.
You're trying to subvert the state while also not getting popped, because if you get, your whole operation wrecked, no matter what it is, even if it's not an operation, even if you're just trying to live outside of it, you're not doing any good if they catch you and kill you, put you in a cage or whatever. You can't, you shouldn't be advertising it as much as possible, which is why I find it hilarious whenever these conversations come up. People always ask, well, what do you do? How are you an agorist? I'm like, I'm not going to fucking tell you anything that I do on the internet. That's for fucking sure. Like, why would I declare this publicly? That's ridiculous. And then they feel like they won the argument. They're the pigeon on the chessboard and knock over all the pieces and shit everywhere and claim victory. And it's like, okay, well, you keep thinking that then.
All right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they want to know, well, well, how are you defining the state? Yes, sir. Let me just write this out on CIA/NSA book. I'll list my crimes in order, so you can run to the nearest state police or sheriff's office and turn me in. Thank you so much, sir. Have a good day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a
Sorry,
question I thought of for
but
you
yeah,
too. The people who ask that are also generally voters, because they're asking that in response to like, well, what are you doing if
sure,
you're not voting? And I think the programming has worked perfectly on them
right.
to think that voting is the only way to do anything, let alone that voting is an action, that it's actually an action being taken against the
Yes,
state or anything like that.
yes. So it's difficult because when you're challenging someone whose worldview is kind of secure,
Mm-hmm.
They sort of have that feeling of righteousness or internal drive to believe that the world they exist and are thrown in, as I said, is as it should be. And from generation to generation, that seems to have persisted, and I don't see it really deviating from that generalized distribution. Um, when you challenge someone, it seems more like the type of person you're describing wants to listen to respond or listen to pick you apart to the point that they're no longer a threat to your personal worldview.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much an actual academic argument where you're presenting sides and sort of, pulling and planting seeds and seeing what you can do. It's people kind of just looking to tear you apart to the point where they feel justified and that their worldview is still secure, for lack
Mm-hmm.
of a better term.
Do you think?
Um,
Oh, sorry. I thought you were finished. Finish your thought, and then I got
no, go
another
ahead.
question.
Go ahead. No,
Okay.
no, I was,
Do you
no,
think
no, it's,
voting is the pragmatic approach? Because that's what I keep getting hit with.
that's a really difficult question because if I go in and vote, um, I'm mostly giving a vote to like my anarchist friends who live near me,
Mm-hmm.
to just see if they show up on a ballot somewhere, or I will like I'll vote in Daffy Duck or Mickey Mouse or stuff like that, and I'll almost always say no to any like, should we float a bond from the taxpayer to pay for this? Um, Mostly it's just me taking my little kids into a voting poll booth so the old ladies and gentlemen have somebody to fuss over rather than deal with people who want to argue about politics in front of them while they're trying to collect the ballot from them. And my kids get a ton of food and they're always happy. So I know it sounds like I know I'm sounding boomerish and giving you a Matlock story that goes nowhere, but in terms of voting for me personally, I don't care. I don't think it goes anywhere. I don't think it's ever going to be the most important election of our time, because I just think it's too easy to just pull a lever and think you reward it with something, or even depending on the generation, entitled to something from it.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of comes back to the reinforcers of people who post some really salacious and horrible things, like when there's uh, police officers who abuse people or shoot animals or are cruel and horrible people, and they just kind of throw it out on the internet. And it gets tons of angry reacts every time. It gets the F the police thing. And I'm not trying to talk like I'm defending cops. Please don't think
Sure.
that. It's just, you're not really reinforcing a better outcome for those people. They don't have to worry about paying you back because they're doing it in your dime.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting paid in your dime. They're also settling out of court or in court on your dime. You're not really making it a point where the society is looking at these people like, if you want to do this, you're going to be in trouble. Sort of like the Bundy standoff, if that makes sense.
Sure.
When all those militias showed up, you had people with semi-automatic rifles aiming at these federal agents, and I'm almost sure no one can prove it, but in my mind, if they hadn't showed up, I kind of think that would have went a lot worse than it could have.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's sad that you have to de-escalate with the state using your own weapons, but that seems to be what, you know, perhaps those founding fathers intended. But to talk about in terms of voting and reinforcement and different things, not really doing anything about it, to me, they're linked in that you can talk about it, you can drag people to it, you can give ideas, but ultimately when you walk away from your phone or you walk away from your computer, it's still kind of going on, if that makes sense. You know, we all joke about Epstein didn't kill himself, and, you know, it made it on the frickin' CNN, it made it to the Golden Globes. You know, it made Tom Hanks do the face and
the pedo face.
The pedo face. Yeah, you had to tell you've been involved in a sexual scandal. You know, so there are seeds and outcomes that do work with the internet. It's just that some of the stuff that really like gets a knot in your chest like this, that you might walk around angry for 5 minutes. Sometimes you have to choose the lesser of two paths, not push that button by sharing the video and kind of going like, okay, what can I do? Is that sort of wrap the two up, or do I need to extrapolate for you?
No, love it. I've just had in my head, I mean, I think we mostly agree that voting is useless. I choose not to even go to a polling place or participate in any way, and I encourage others not to, because of the way that the process is funded. Because you're showing up and you know, legitimizing the job of the person there who's funded through extortion, taxation. I can't stand that. I can't stand the idea of money being taken from me and used in, you know, bombing kids across the, you know, the ocean from us, whatever, anything like that. But I think that the people who hit you with the, you have two choices, either voting is violence or voting is useless. I don't think it's just two choices. I think it's useless, and I think the process around it, the structure around it, is funded through violence. I think that's would it be a false dichotomy? I don't know.
Absolutely. I'm not sure, but I think that would lend well to the idea of mayo being blame. It spreads everywhere. It's not only violent, but it's useless. You know, they don't. Look at, oh God, I got to think of what states it was. There was 2 states as terms of voting being useless. Maine did it. You know what Maine did it? They had a public referendum that was pushed through by the liberal cities of like Bangor and Portland, which are their 2 biggest cities. And they wanted marijuana legalization. You know, they had to be 21. They said, oh, go ahead, tax it, man, tax it. And then the aggers just sitting there, 6 more months, they'll be back.
Yeah.
And, you know, it passed like, it was literally like 51-49 within like 10,000 votes.
Wow.
And it was still considered passed. It went to the governor, who at the time was Paul LePage. I think if you do a quick Google on him, he made CNN and stuff, because he said some things that certainly they tried to paint as racist, but I think it's iffy. It's just something to run to the press tabloids with. But he looked at it, he didn't want to do nothing with it. Like, just too close, I don't care.
Yeah.
You know, so you can have these sort of movements that, you know, come along where you have referendums. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania wanted to get rid of property taxes.
Okay.
They wanted to say, you know, schools aren't going to be funded by this shit. Find another way to steal from us. And the referendum passed, and I think it was during Governor Wolf's tenure. It was the current guy. He's a lefty. He just looked at it and just, I don't care.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. You just look at it and go. And certainly those are 2 examples, and I'm sure dealing with people like you've been asking me about, they'd be like, well, you can't expect them to do everything. You know, they start defending the person because the person's not there to defend themselves, if that makes sense. I guess for a quick advice on that, if somebody starts doing that, whether like you're on that Joe Rogan group with Daniel and you have people like that suddenly want to defend a politician, you go, whoa, listen, the guy has Twitter, the guy has a Facebook page, he can defend himself. You don't
Hey,
need
that's
to
a
do
good
that.
idea. Yeah.
And I think that, and people in power often rely on that kind of thing, whether it's just, you know, a singer who says questionable or sings questionable things, or it's a politician, and you'll often find that fans or people loyal to that shared interest will often defend for them, and maybe take it and just keep trying to pull out, be like, no, don't. We're talking about this guy, but come on, keep the ball in your court here, buddy. Don't make words and put them in Trump's mouth. That's again to the thing with Make America Great. In their head, they have an idea that that's what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever it means for them. Sorry, for hope and change. And if you can kind of maybe keep trying to keep them cognitively on the individual, you kind of might plant some seeds. Or like you said, it's probably the same outcome of like, I don't care about it.
Yeah.
Glass it.
Yeah.
You know, a guy I've never heard of before in my entire life in an embassy I totally forgot about, that wasted millions, if not, hundreds of millions of taxpayer money, got bombed, and we just wiped them off the face of the earth. Fuck yeah, but you've never heard of them before today, have you?
Right.
I mean, I assume some people have. You pay attention to, like, information, geopolitical politics, but all these things kind of come about, and people will defend it, and sometimes you listen to them drone on, and you kind of look at them, and you're not sure why they're defending it. And I'm sure you've encountered that thousands, if not millions of times.
Well, and I think I do know why, and I think it comes down to tribalism and apathy. Like I've been saying, they don't want to take any responsibility for their own anything, and it gets laid on government, and that becomes their tribe because it's doing shit for them, they think.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. The other thing generationally too, you're seeing more and more, and I know they target millennials, but younger generations too, they talk about, socialism. They all want to go like Feel the Burn or Bernie Sanders or different ideas like that, or the chick from the Bronx or whatever. And
AOC.
You kind of, yes, her. There we go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm shit with names. It takes me a bit. You have this desirable outcome because it's been ingrained since public school that government is an answer, but they don't really tell you what the questions were that got there. They give you the vague, like, flowery language version of the Founding Fathers, the Civil War, and then some stuff about World War II if you're lucky, and not much else. Mm-hmm. They don't really talk to you about stuff. How can I put this?
They don't go in depth.
Like,
that's for sure.
No, they don't, and they tell you government is the answer, so you just rob people for more to fix it, and that is personally violence to me and affront personally, because that's the apathy you're talking about. That's mm-hmm. the non-desire to be a part of that, and older people will say something, but well, what about Catholic charities, or what about Mormon charities, or whatever churches have a good mm-hmm. foothold in charities? They go, there's all these strings attached, and you look at them and go, oh, okay, but if you get your Great Revolution, I'm pretty sure the string will be around my neck if I don't join it. Maybe.
Right.
And I'm not saying either one's better than the other, right? But at one time, either our grandparents or great-grandparents, churches were the center of community for people, not so much the internet or the TV, mm-hmm. so to speak. And your street tribe also might have included your church tribe, and your church tribe might have come from all over, and then your tribe sort of shifts to the church tribe, and you might have had people you knew in your church who could help you. And I'm not really trying. Please don't think I'm making positive comments on religion and what it can do, because we could spend like 3 podcasts there and that mm-hmm. apart. But you had options a while ago where there were people who would help you get your healthcare taken care of if you needed help doing something. You had these hubs, and people have sort of abdicated it and either sought anarchy and logic and truth and all those kind of, like, their ideals of truth, and others have looked at the church and literally that's their golden calf, that's mm-hmm. their tabernacle now, like whatever the state says, that's
right.
And it's this weird mix of like this religion and almost like tribalism, if that makes sense.
Well, it seems like that,
and they can't seem to escape it.
That generation, the generations that would have had the church be the center of their community, and the charity and all that
Right.
stuff, and gather around that. We're also the generations that were more self-sufficient within their community, of course.
Yes, exactly.
And now that we don't have that regularly with people, like most nobody is self-sufficient in any way, shape, or form. Those structures, we lose that structure, and people still naturally look for a structure to be a part of, to be taken care of, especially if they're not taking care of themselves. Yes. So the real question is,
Exactly.
I don't think that anarchy is necessarily no structure, but it's finding the structure that works for, the fucking logo, total freedom, no exceptions, that brings people together.
Exactly. Yes, 100%.
That's my thought. And that's why I have a problem
agree.
with a lot of the anti-hierarchical arguments, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a top-down hierarchy. It doesn't need to be an oppressive hierarchy. There's different types of hierarchies. Hierarchy may even just be a buzzword if we really need to be talking about structure. There's all kinds of different shit. So, fuck. It's frustrating.
Oh, I got you.
But that's why we do this. That's why we sit down and talk to smart people like you for an hour plus every weekend and get that stuff out there. So, and speaking of which, we're
You're being overly generous, sir.
Well, we're overtime. Right. So let's call it an excellent episode, a new favorite of mine for sure. I love talking about this stuff. We're going to do it again because we could definitely do it for more and more hours. Maybe you can jump on the hot tokes with me and Daniel at some point too. I know you're a fan of those. So that'd be awesome to get all three of us on.
Yeah, I am.
Awesome.
As long as you can take me and Dan and giggle in half the episode, we'll be okay.
Oh, absolutely. Hot tokes are fun. Hot tokes are they're a little bit of everything, but they're a lot of fun. But yeah, we're gonna jump into a quick Patreon after hours video. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see right there at the bottom of the screen, patreon.com/thedankpodstash. If you want to see these videos or get the hot tokes early, anything like that, support the show. If you find yourself not in a position to support monetarily, just a like, subscribe, comment, any of that stuff, I'd really appreciate it. Dennis, thank you very much for coming on today. It was awesome. Like I said, we're gonna fucking do it again.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Hell yeah, man. I enjoyed it. Remember, everybody, total freedom, no exceptions. Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash is sponsored by Anarchy Lifting. Go to anarchyliftingcoaching.com to learn more.